Welcome back to another episode of The Donkey and the Bee, where we got the jackass over here and the biatch. We are living the best life together, succeeding and failing, and everything in between.
We are, 19 years strong, married together, and marriage is easy. I was actually at a men's group last week, and we were all talking about marriage, and I was like, guys, I don't mean to change the vibe here, but marriage is easy for me, right? Like, we've been going at this for a long time, and it's kind of a cakewalk, and I don't know really what the secret is. And then we started to unpack some of these things. So we wanted to share this with everybody. The 2 things to make your marriage easy.
It's easy when you're married to me. You didn't hear me saying that, huh? It's pretty hard for me on this side of things. I'm just kidding. I think that we got on the same page on a lot of different things in the very beginning of our marriage. And that is really what has catapulted us to the success that I think that we have in our marriage today. And I love talking about these 2 things that we're going to talk about today because nobody really talks about them in their marriage. It's like this forbidden, unspoken that you can't talk about it. And if you do, they're both going to get really uncomfortable and then it's going to cause more problems. So let's just not talk about it at all. Let's just shove it under the rug and let's pretend it's not there. And it's going to get better eventually. And that's not the case. If you don't talk about them, it's going to be like that big zit on your face. It's just going to get bigger and bigger. And it's going to be more annoying and more annoying. And it's just going to cause more problems. And so this is why we like talking about it, so that you can hear us talk about it and hopefully grasp some of the language that we're using so that you can take it back to your spouse and start a conversation on your own.
Well, don't leave people hanging. What are the 2 things?
We're trying to get people to string along. And no, the 2 things are sex
and money.
And money. Yes. And those are the 2 things I think are the 2 kind of wedges, I think, in marriages and that cause divorce. And so if those are the 2 things that cause divorce, why would we not be focusing on those 2 things? Why would we not be focusing on communicating about those 2 things instead of ignoring them?
It's not something that is just one conversation and you're good on, right? This is a multiple months of getting on the same page. And sometimes it starts out super awkward. Laura and I happen to be very young and awkward ourselves when we first got married. So it was just fine. We're just going with the flow, right? We were 21 and 23 and very naive to the world. So it was just like, hey, let's just fumble along through this together. But sex, let's talk about that first, because honestly, I think that is the biggest thing, at least from a man's perspective, the biggest disagreement, the biggest thing that you have resentment towards with your spouse. There's just so much that never gets said, that gets built up, and then, one spouse or another goes outside of the marriage, start doing things, and then it's just like this big old cluster, and then the marriage explodes.
I think in our case, we didn't, and I've said this before in past podcasts we had, in our case, we didn't have a lot of trauma in that area. I know there's a lot of listeners probably out there that have had traumatic experiences in their sex life with past partners or past spouses or whatever it may be. And so I think that when you have that and you bring that trauma into a relationship, it can get messy. And so I think because we didn't have that, as I've said, I didn't have sex with anyone before Brett. And so he was my first one. Brett did, but it wasn't very many. And so I think there wasn't a lot of trauma there. And so I think that kind of helped us start us off on a simpler path towards connection. And so if you do bring that trauma into your relationship, I feel like that there is an extra step that you have to really heal through that together.
So regarding sex, it's just really expectations, right? What are my expectations for sex? What are your expectations for sex? When do we want to do it? How much do we want to do it, right? You can have a really high active sex life and be great together. You can have a really low active sex life and be great together. But you just have to identify and at least get close to the same page of what these things are. You don't have to agree every single time we're both going to want sex at the same time. That's not real life. But when I know what your sexual expectations are and you know what mine is, when we both know how to pleasure the other person, when we know what to do on period times and when the kids are young and all of that kind of stuff, right? When life gets messy and gets in the way, we have a clear understanding, and we did not at the very beginning, and we did not the first few years, honestly. Like, it was a lot of just, hey, here's an issue, let's talk through it. Here's another issue, let's talk through it. And I would encourage everyone to start there, is let's just spill the beans. What do we want for our sex lives? What does our partners want for our sex lives? What are the expectations? And we're not going to be perfect. We're not going to meet them completely, but at least start with the awareness of what your partner's sexual expectations are.
What comes with that can be an embarrassment, I think, to one or both parties, where if one person comes forward and says, I really want sex 3 to 4 times a week, and the other person responds in like a shocked face and is like, well, I only want sex 1 time a week. It kind of makes them feel in a way like less than, like, oh, I want it too much or I don't want it enough. And so I think that this is again where the communication comes into play. Like, okay, well, is there a reason why you want it 3 or 4 times a week? You can answer that. Yes, I'm a man. I have, it's built up in me and I need to get it out. And so I think it's because Brett, has communicated to me in a way that I understand why he wants it that way. It's not because he's super horny all the time. It's just like wants it all the time. No, I think there's the genetic reason behind it that was explained to me in a way that was like, oh, well, that makes sense. Okay, then I understand why you need it 3 to 4 times a week. So I think it's more of just communicating your needs and why those are your needs.
To kind of couple on to that, I think this topic can get a little messy, but it's really important to really just talk through all these kind of things. But there's porn that goes into these kind of things. There's masturbation. There's looking at the opposite spouse or sex outside of the relationship. All of these kind of things you can set boundaries on. You're not going to be perfect, right? No one's perfect, but at least here's what the expectations are. And especially with like porn and things like that, it gets real sticky if one person thinks, hey, it's okay and I'm going to do this and this is what I've always done prior to getting together, and the other person's like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe you would do something like that. We are married now and that's something that can't happen. Like, you've broken my trust. There's so many different things that people see this on, and it's honestly a hard conversation, but it's a very necessary conversation for the longevity of your marriage.
We've had the conversations many times, like Brett said, and I literally don't even think I could look him in the eye when we first had the conversations. I literally would look somewhere else because I was so embarrassed. Like, I didn't want to look him in the eye. But we still talked about it, right? Like, we still got it out. We still talked about it. So I think that there's this expectation of this conversation is going to be perfect. The words are going to flow and everything. It's not. It's going to be super uncomfortable. You're going to fumble over your words. Sometimes you're not going to know how to effectively communicate your feelings, and that's okay. I think this is your partner. This is like the person you're doing life with. This is a person that you trust, and I think that your vulnerability is important during this conversation. It's important to be vulnerable. It's important to be open. It's important to not really care if you stumble over your words and be like, oh wait, I didn't mean it that way. Hold on, let me say it a different way. That's okay. I think it's good to know that it's not going to be a perfect conversation.
They are not perfect conversations. I can think back on a bunch of them where you're crying and I'm yelling, and it's just like, oh my gosh, this did not go very smooth.
It's never the opposite. I'm never yelling and you're never crying. So
it happens. Yeah. So I would just say that, it's not easy, and life is not supposed to be easy, but it is such an important thing to do, to get out and just set a time, set a space to be like, babe, let's talk about sex. Let's just sit down when there's no kids around, when there's no distractions, turn off our phones, put it in airplane mode, and just be like, just sit in this and just do it. Mm-hmm. And the second topic is money. The second thing that I think is on the very top of splitting up marriages and relationships is not having similar expectations on money. And so we got married in college, broke as crap. So we both started in the same spot, which makes it much, much easier, right? If you start on your second or third marriage and one person has a bunch of assets and one person doesn't, that's a little bit of a trickier spot. But I can speak to our situation. We started young and poor, and we got on the same page, and we had these conversations. We talked through budgeting. We talked through what we can spend through fun money. I gave Laura a $50 a month budget when we first got married to get new clothes. Like, that's all she could spend, because I was probably spending like $15 a month on it. And we were just living very, very modestly, but really, really happy. And so I think that is an important distinction here. It does not matter if you are really broke or have multiple millions of dollars. There's success in your marriage and there's failure in your marriage anywhere in between. But it all goes back to the expectations. How are we treating our money? How are we respecting it? Are we growing in that space? Are we on the same page with those things?
I have to admit, I'm just going to be fully honest here, that when we first started to make a little bit of money, that I did hide purchases from you. And I'm saying this now because I know that there's so much like joking talk out there that's like, oh, hi, you know, it has like the doormat that says like, if you're the Amazon guy, like drop the packages like somewhere else type of thing, so the husband doesn't know. I can relate to that because I did. I purchased things that I didn't want you to know about. And I think it's just because I saw a little bit of success and I was like, ooh, like I deserve this. I hate that. I don't even know why I would say that in my mind. But so I wanted to say that because I know that a lot of women do that. And so I wanted to be honest and say that I did that too. I do not do that anymore. If I just buy something, I just buy it. I say that I wanted it. It's not a big deal. So I think it's being upfront and honest with your spouse about the expectations of the finances. And we talk about this pretty frequently. I mean, we're really open and honest about our finances because we share our finances. I think that's another thing that maybe people don't do. There are some married couples who have separate bank accounts, and I think that's a little strange because we never did that. But because you're together, you're a team, your money should be together as well. And so we have the same goals toward our finances. We've talked about them, and we agree on those same goals. And I think that's important. We're heading toward the same direction. And so if we did not have similar goals, if you wanted to go this way and I wanted to go the opposite way, then I think that would be really difficult. I think that's where there would be some conflict.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about the same direction. And so I see a lot of times you have one spouse who is growth oriented. They want to plan for retirement. They want to save for their kids' college. And you have one spouse that doesn't want to do much of anything, right? The money is there to spend, right? I have one life to live and I might not live past tomorrow, and they're just going to spend every dollar that they have. Mm-hmm. And so honestly, that right there is such a hard place to be in on both sides, really. Mm-hmm. It's just a lot of conflict and disagreement. And honestly, how are you supposed to plan for retirement and take care of your spouse and your kids and all of that kind of stuff if that's the case? You got to get on the same page. And it does not have to be to the same proportion. You can still have the spender and the saver. But you know what? You got to at least agree to split some of this percentage of your income off and say, you know what? All right, let's get on the same page with this kind of stuff. You can still be more of the saver. I can still be more of the spender. But you know what? We have to have some type of expectations for, you know, our safety net, for our savings, for buying assets, for retirement, all of those kind of things. And again, that just starts with another really awkward conversation, which doesn't lead to a conclusion. It just leads to another really awkward conversation later on down the line, probably when next time you get pissed about it. Mm-hmm. And it's just a series of, hey, you know what? This is not working, right? Mm-hmm. Let's actually pause, turn off our phones, and have a conversation about it. And it's just, I mean, how many money conversations have we had?
So many.
So many conversations, but at least we got past a lot of the disagreement conversations. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where we're trying to talk here is this is how you have a successful marriage because you get on the same page. You don't start with that first 10 conversations on the same page. It's a lot of figuring things out and listening to the other person's point of view. But once you have solidified your foundation, then you say, okay, now, you know what? Let's point the same direction, the same growth together. And one person could be pulling the other one and the other one kind of dragging. That's just real life, right? But as long as you both are saying, hey, all right, we agree to go this direction and not to, you know, sit on the couch the whole time.
Mm-hmm. So what would you say would be, I guess, an action for someone listening who wants to have a conversation about sex and about money? Maybe they're not on the same page with their spouse. What would they do in this circumstance? Would they just sit down like this at a table and look their spouse in the eye and just like start a conversation? What do you think would be the best way to approach that?
I would put it in the calendar, honestly, and I would schedule a day date or an evening date or whatever it is, right? Someplace quiet, go to dinner where you're not getting interrupted. It's maybe something different, and just time block, at least 2 hours, something, and do that. Maybe it's an hour per topic or whatever current issues you guys have. And I think you kind of get on the same page, especially with money, in maybe 2 or 3 kind of categories. On the budgeting side, and I kind of think of it like as a football analogy, that's like your defensive team. Let's build our defensive team. Let's talk about, what are we going to cut from the budget? What are we, allowing ourselves to spend? And then let's talk about the next part of it, like our offensive team. How are we, trying to grow our active income? Are we trying to push towards this kind of raise, right? And if that's the case, then it kind of goes into this time management conversation of, don't give me a hard time if I'm agreeing to this and I need to spend extra time at work, or if I need to pick up a side hustle, or vice versa. Mm-hmm. And the third topic there would be more of your investment side, the retirement side, the long-term income side, the cash flow, right? Whether you decide to, hey, let's start investing in our retirement. Let's start putting money away there. Let's buy our first rental property. Let's whatever it is, but some type of future self growth in that perspective, and have kind of, if you need a template, there's 3 different conversations. Have them pretty short and just get an intro into it and get on the same page with these things. All right, so back to you. If you as the woman, the wife, are trying to get on the same page with your husband, and you know that he has clearly higher sexual needs than you, or you see that he has porn and other things like that, and you're not on the same page with that, how do you initiate that conversation to start to unpack these things?
I think it'd be similar to what you just said with time blocking it. I think that people kind of have a negative outlook on time blocking things, especially when it comes to a relationship with your spouse. But I think it's important to do that because we all have busy lives. And if you are really going to make this a priority in your life, you have to time block it. And so I would approach it as, if there's something that is against like my morals and values, or something that just kind of like, I don't want to say hurts my feelings. That sounds so...
but it does.
But it does. It sounds very immature. I don't know how else to word it. I think hurts my feelings is a good way to put it. I think that I would ask you about it. I would sit down and I would say, hey, like, this is really bothering me, or this doesn't sit right with me. What are your thoughts on this? Or why are you doing this? Or what is the satisfaction in this? Or something to where I maybe can understand a deeper knowledge of why you're doing this or why you're not doing this. Or I think having the perspective of your spouse, like, because you have your own perspective of things, right? I think taking yourself out of your own self and seeing the perspective of your spouse, I think is really hard to do, but I think is necessary in this situation. And so if, your husband does need more sex, and I'm expecting him to not watch porn, but then I'm also saying that, I don't want to have sex that much, then that's so unfair to your husband. Like, that is just something that I just don't think is a good way to approach that. If you're telling your husband you don't want him to watch porn, then I feel like you need to be ready and available for him. And it's not like you're just giving your body up and you're just a ragdoll. It's an agreement. Like, you're satisfying each other's needs. And that's really what marriage is about. You do, like, you're a partnership, but you're satisfying each other's needs. And so being on the same page, communicating, asking why they're doing it, how much are they expecting sex, and then if you want to talk about that porn, I think it's important to, because that's important to be on the same page in your marriage.
Well, that's it for this episode. I hope you can take these practical action steps, crush your sex life, get your money on the same page, and have an amazing marriage.